Namaste. This is Vikram Sharma, and you're watching Hindu Post. So today we have a guest, Shri Ranbir Singh, who's a researcher, a writer, and an activist for Hindu rights as well as pagan rights. He critiques both the left wing and the right wing narratives, Western narratives. Uh, in early 2000, Ranbir ji started an organization called Hindu Human Rights, a UK-based organization, and which the goal of which is to raise issues concerning the persecution and defamation of Hindus across the globe. Now, I just want to point out that this organization should not be confused with the US-based Hindus for Human Rights, which is a very notorious proxy organization, which is absolutely anti-Hindu, and it allies with other orgs like Equality Labs, Indian American Muslim Council. So, before we get into the topic of our discussion today, which is to understand Hinduphobia in the West and to try and trace its roots back to the colonial period, Ranbir ji, could you just tell us a little bit about your own personal journey into becoming a Hindu activist?
Thank you, Vikramji, so much for that. So basically, this one was quite interesting. I'm actually from a Sikh family. My parents were immigrants to the UK from India, early 1960s. And because of the Sikh separatist sort of influence, they'd lost a lot of their Hindu roots. So I had to kind of educate myself, reading myself. I kind of thought I was going against my tradition because also in 1984, family members affected by the massacres in Delhi. But then I, of course, found out it wasn't quite like that. Wasn't a Hindu massacre of Sikhs. It was a more political thing. And also, reading stuff now Sikh separatism started, I realised that Sikhs are part of the wider Hindu culture. I also found that a lot of information wasn't available. I had to really dig for it. And why wasn't it available? And also, why were Hindus constantly being persecuted? But there was some reference to it, but scant mention, often excuses. In fact, I appreciate you making a differentiation between the Hindu Human Rights Group, which is mine, and Hindus for Human Rights. It's no coincidence that they're working against their own people and traditions, because that's what I found. That's what HHR was founded. We don't necessarily differentiate between Western ideas or Indic ideas. For us, it's just ideas. Good source information are good source information. We never demand special rights for Hindus, just the same rights as other people. And to reject everything Western, no, that's wrong. No, there are important Western ideas that on human rights and democracy that we do accept and I think should be advanced and which are universally applicable. Unfortunately, in the 2 decades since HHR was formed, things in many ways have gone backwards, which I hope to examine in this program. Okay.
Thank you. So, today we are seeing Hinduphobia manifest in the West, and it's becoming quite obvious. So, do you think this is a new phenomenon, or has this always existed under the surface? And how do you see the roots of this, thing?
Well, this has always existed. The roots are in pagan phobia. What we call Western civilization has 2 main origins: the classical inheritance, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, out of which came the church, out of which came Christianity. And later out of Christianity, you got ideas like liberalism and Marxism, or all the rest of various things, secular versions of religion, basically. In fact, atheism comes out of it as well, because to reject God, you need to have a belief in that theory. So it's a more deep-rooted pagan phobia, while at the same time having an admiration for the pagan past, which Western culture is based on. Within India, actually the term Hinduphobia was first mentioned in the 19th century in England. It is not a new term by any means. When the British came to India, they didn't fully understand the civilization they encountered. With Islam, it's more familiar. You had a religious text, single focus. It was in a way a sister religion to Christianity. But they basically construct a thing called Hinduism out of various beliefs and cultures they encountered. For example, there are many sacred Indian texts, so they chose Vedas. Oh, this is the Hindu text. Well, it's not. In fact, that mindset was actually absorbed by well-meaning, but I'd say misguided, we call Hindu reform movements. Brahmo Samaj by Ram Mohan Roy, and more distinctly by the Arya Samaj of Swami Dayananda, because they said the original Vedic religion, Hinduism, wasn't, polytheistic or idolatrous, as if there's anything wrong with that anyway. It was monotheistic, the original monotheism, and the Vedas were a revelation. That, of course, is not true. I understand why these ideas took place that time, because you're trying to adapt the pressures and the environment you find yourself under. But with hindsight, obviously, it wasn't true. But at root, it is that fear of the other. And also, it's much easier to, I'd say, attack Hindus without any repercussion. It's very important to make a people who hate its past and hate its civilization. And it's interesting that some of the most anti-Hindu voices are from Hindu backgrounds. For example, those that dominate the Communist Party in India, the group you mentioned before, Hindus for Human Rights. Yet some of the most important theorists for modern Hindu ideas are in fact from the West. David Froese from America, Francois Gautier from France, he lives in India, but he's from France, Cornell's from Belgium, and indeed many others. So they overcame their own, because David Frawley and both Cornell's came from very strict Catholic backgrounds. And they overcame it. They channeled their spirituality into what they found something more ancient. And as a result, being outsiders, they actually have much more of an appreciation for it and haven't been brainwashed by the Indian educational system, which encourages a view of secularism, which is anti-Hindu. Yeah. So the problem here is that secularism arose not in an Indian environment, but a Western environment against the dominant church, but they've twisted it around to attack the very thing the church itself hated. And that's why it's so deep-rooted and very hard to get rid of.
So, do you think that Hindus today, and especially since independence in Bharat, they are more disconnected from their roots, and that is why maybe we are seeing more of the outsiders who are able to appreciate the civilization and dharma more. And another question that I had, maybe you can answer both of them together, is, we recently saw the Leicester anti-Hindu violence. And that was, I think, that kind of violence has not been seen in the West against Hindus, at least a few decades. And Hindus have always considered themselves, and we have been told that, we are a model minority, we are very well integrated into the West, and we are very appreciated for that. But now we are seeing this hostility, and there doesn't seem to be any support from the Western state and police. So, could you just talk a bit about what is causing that?
Okay, well, let's take the second part of what you asked first, Rukramji. Hindus keep saying with a model minority. Follow the example of the Jews. Look, the truth is, they don't understand the Jewish experience in the UK, in fact, Europe. The Jews weren't placid. They did fight back, Battle of Cable Street, 1936, against the black shirts, the British Union fascists. And in fact, after the war, there was a revival of neo-fascism. This is before mass immigration became an issue in the UK. The 43 group, they physically fought back neo-fascists. Vidal Sassoon, famous hairdresser, Jewish background, is a center he founded to study anti-Semitism. He was in the 43 group, taking on some fascist thugs on the streets who were attacking Jews. The other problem with this model minority issue is that, look, other communities do well. They don't brag about it. There are very many professionals from Nigerian background, Chinese background. They don't go on about how we're big people and how affluent we are. You don't do that. You generate jealousy, envy. And look, not all Hindus are necessarily affluent or the model minority. There are many that work long hours in corner shops. There are many that work long hours in factory work, in sweatshops. And let's not forget the Gurkhas recruiting the British Army. They're Hindus. Are you saying they're the minority? They're often forgotten about. They only look at certain business class and certain professionals, and not everyone is there. And the problem with that is there's a disconnect between their world and that of many other Hindus. Yeah. To say that, oh, we're peaceful, they appreciate us. Look, that isn't true. They are seen as an easy target. Jews, a lot of them are well off and were targeted. Many were not, lived in slum areas of the East End. Areas that now mostly, like Bethnal Green, where Bangladeshis live, and later on Somalis, and other immigrant groups. But it actually creates envy. It is a mistake to keep saying we are model minority, we are this, because if you are one, you don't need to keep going on about it, right? Now go back to your first question. What's happening in India? Two currents are currently happening. You have rise of Modi, BJP, other figures. In the West, it looks like there's this rise in Hindu nationalism, Hindu fascism. No, it's just a country going back to its cultural moorings after decades. At the same time, you have this modernism taking on the worst aspects of the West. Yeah, the sort of gratification, instant gratification from social media, TikTok, and those areas. The idea of taking on certain things to be modern. In a day, there are many good things about the West, and they should take them on board. India's done really well as a democracy, compared to other countries, not perfect, but nowhere is. It hasn't had military coups, and the parliament system, this has worked well in India. We can't deny it. It was a genuine benefit. I think it needs reform, but that's a separate matter. But the main area where Hindus do lose out on is Kulturkampf, German word, the cultural war, the narrative. They aren't able to counter the narrative that's being said about them. And that's why I said originally Hinduphobia is related to pagan phobia. We're basically dark-skinned, heathen, idol-worshipping savages. They may use different words like Hindu fascism or Hindu nationalism, but basically it's the same racism, it's the same colonialism. The fact it's being done by people who regard themselves as left-wing, as liberals, as progressives, shouldn't make a difference. That's what's been basically pushed on the educated mass of India, dominated, especially the English-speaking media in India. And that's who the Western media and academia speak to. Not the masses speak vernaculars, but the English-speaking elite, who are cut off from their culture to a large extent.
Yeah, and I was reading one of your articles. You talked about Winston Churchill's infamous remark, I hate all Indians, and they have a beastly religion. They're a beastly people with a beastly religion. And then you mentioned that, that rhetoric is basically used to target Hindus by both the left wing and the right wing.
Mm-hmm.
So can you just describe a little bit more about that and how those attitudes have been almost forgotten by Hindus today, who consider the West as a natural ally, right? So,
well, the thing is that in the West now you have a big kind of gap, cultural war between left and the right. The left often called woke, who blame everything bad in the West. They want to topple the status of slave traders. They want to they attack church as a racist. Look, these were ideas at a certain point in time. I'm not accepting them, but that wasn't unusual for that time period. Then you've got the right who are defending it, saying, and actually they do have a point. If you get rid of all these institutions, you get all these figures, you undermine the whole basis of human rights and democracy, which we all benefit from. That's true. Now, they both unite against Hindus, okay? So when the Indian cricket team took the knee for Black Lives Matter, right-wing commentator Douglas Murray said, oh, what about India's caste system? Yeah, he hates the Marxist left, but that is such a Marxist remark, because the Marxists say the same thing. Look at India's caste system. When you want to attack Hindus, all you do is mention caste system. The very fact that India has a prime minister of backward caste background, okay, Narendra Modi, and poverty background as well. You have a president from Santal tribal background, Draupadi, and you have the previous president, Kovind, from the colonial caste, Dalit background, and in very extreme poverty, grew up in a mud hut. That's lost on them. No, I'm not denying there are issues of poverty and the social gap and the rest of it. But that caste one is the glue that whatever political alliance they have in the West, left, right, center, they all agree on. It's like anti-Semitism. It just changes. So for the left, Hindus are, they've got a caste system based on the racist Aryan invasion theory. That's why there's inequality. And for the right, they got a caste system based on the Aryan invasion theory. I mean, there's no difference. Yeah. Churchill himself went on about, oh, if we leave India, the depressed classes are going to be oppressed by these disgusting Brahmins. Well, this is somebody who himself was from an aristocratic background, believe the son of the Duke of Marlborough. He suppressed working class, he suppressed unions. So why would he care less about the depressed classes in India? You know, but it's a good stick to beat Hindus with. Yeah. And that's how they unite on it. You know, I was talking with Winston Churchill fans now blocked me on Twitter, and he used a very left argument that he attacks. You know, he's saying, "Oh, the British came to India and they suppressed the caste system. They didn't do anything of the sort." You know, in their own country at that time, working class didn't have the vote. There was no votes for women until the 20th century. There was no labour protection laws in the 19th century. So how do they somehow create equality in India when they couldn't do it in their own country? In fact, he's insulting his own history by saying that. You know, but that's the thing that's taken us for granted. Everyone unites on that issue of caste. Everyone that's that issue of sati, forgetting about witch burning in place in Europe until really quite late. Because it's easier. And for the left, it's quite interesting. They look at Marx as some sort of messiah. And that's where all those ideas come from. Marx himself was racist, anti-Semitic, and said India should be under British rule in order to modernize. That's a very colonialist comment. We won't get them ever admitting to it.
Right. So you're right. You know, UK it didn't give full franchise to adults up until I think it was the early 20th century.
1918. Yeah.
1918, right? And so basically, the period when colonialism was at its peak in the 19th century, they themselves were basically practicing a kind of form of social hierarchy between the nobles, or you can say the upper classes, and the working classes in UK.
That's true. And in fact, that continued until after the Second World War. There's a famous case where they're trying to ban a book. You might have heard of it, D.H. Lawrence's Lady Chatterley's Lover. And in 1961, the prosecution said, and got laughed out of court, saying, "Do you want this book to be read by your servants?" And he thought he was completely out of touch. Going into domestic service was a career option or only option for a lot of people who had no other avenue. So was the workhouse. It was a penal institution, almost like a prison, where if you were on the verge of starvation, you went in and you basically got something to eat and you did menial work. They weren't closed down until the 1920s. Up until the 1970s, children were orphaned or from single-parent families or felt to be from dysfunctional families were taken and shipped off to Australia. Other places were Canada, Rhodesia, but mostly Australia, known as the stolen generation. That didn't come out for a very long time. So even amongst their own host community in the metropole, they didn't treat everyone equally. This came much later. The recognition for it came much later. And in fact, now, again, the gap between rich and poor is extreme. We have a prime minister of Indian background, but he went to top school and top university. Again, a lot of, and again, on the opposition benches, you have people again from elite background. So, you know, I'm not saying India is perfect, because of course it isn't. No country is. But you have that chasm in the UK and the USA. It's actually been increasing over the last few decades.
And that's a good point, you know, because what Hindus are demonized and Bharat is demonized for caste is basically a form of feudalism, I would say.
Yes.
It's got a lot to do with, you know, rural life, who controls land and assets, and it's a struggle for resources. And, you know, people also forget that all Indians were colonized and brutally colonized, right? So when you are starved of resources, then a society turns against each other.
And how exactly? And how did feudalism end in Europe or in Britain? Enclosures, agricultural reform, industrialization. That's what you need.
Urbanization.
Yeah, exactly. That's how the working class formed. Now, you want to avoid the problems of the West by having the pollution and the smoke. And, you know, when my dad first came to England, the fog was so thick in London, like with, you know, I mean, as in pollution, they couldn't even see each other. You know, that's how bad the pollution was. Yeah. So you want to obviously avoid things like that. But there is no other template to use apart from that urbanization, because that will break that social structure. Yeah. That will break why you have things like a lot of the violence in India, they make out it's between Brahmins attacking Dalits. Often it's OBCs and Dalits. It's left out. It's not like Brahmins are doing it. Brahmins traditionally relied on charity. Yeah, they weren't massive landowners. So
another thing people forget is, there are so many Sampradayas, or what you can call sects, which don't rely on Brahmin priestly class. They have their own temples, they have their own sons or saints that they follow, and there are Sampradayas like that in every part of Bharat.
Yes.
And today, I think things have changed so radically that many Hindus can go through their lives without any kind of dependence on a Brahmin to practice their dharma.
But if they're dependent on it, it's not the same as being oppressed. That's a totally different issue.
All right. Now let's move on to the other part of our discussion where we want to understand today the West is faced with the problem of Islamism, just like the rest of the world. But still, there is a dichotomy in the way the West tends to ignore the oppression of minorities in Muslim countries. And let's take the example of Pakistan. Whereas Bharat is demonized, often based on fake narratives, and for the smallest of infringements, which is blown out of proportion. So what explains this kind of a double standard or hypocrisy?
It goes back to the creation of Pakistan. Churchill and Lord Wavell created it. Churchill wanted revenge against the Gandhian Congress for daring to fight for Indian independence. They felt India would go communist and Pakistan would be a dependable ally of the West. And in some ways it was. It joined CETA, it joined CENTO. Under Zia-ul-Haq, the Islamification dictator, Pakistan provided support militarily, logistically to the Afghan Mujahideen fighting the Soviets. So it fulfilled that role. But by doing that, it created an absolute monster. They often ignore that it was Hindu majority India under a Jewish general, General Jacob, that liberated Bangladesh from oppression by its fellow Muslims in Pakistan, who were intent on genocide of the Bengalis. Yeah, so I mean, Hindus were targeted, but so were Muslims to a lesser extent. By that time, we couldn't care less. They just wanted to, wipe people out, as General Khan openly bragged about. Whenever Pakistan, like example, Asia Bibi, who was on a blasphemy law, whenever it does something to help a individual against the huge international outcry, it's praised. But people forget that situation wouldn't arise if those blasphemy laws weren't even in place. India has nothing of the sort. They often equate BJP with Jamaat Islami, but it's completely different. In India, calling for a common civil code is regarded as Hindu fundamentalism. But it's a common civil code, not a common religious code or enforcing religious code in other groups. It's a common civil code that benefits everybody. Yet in Pakistan, openly Islamic Republic, where only Muslims by law can have top jobs, no such attack, saying, oh, well, it's liberalizing, it's trying to do its best. No, it's gone backwards from the days of Jinnah, who himself would have fallen foul of those very laws. This goes back to the original thing that I mentioned. Islam is part of Western civilization. It came from the same sort of roots. The classical era, the Christianity, it all came from it. And that's why they can relate to it. For Hindus, we're the largest surviving large body of polytheists and pagans and that oldest civilization. It's an embarrassment to them how this group survived. At root, that is the problem. No matter how much they admire it, it shows an alternative view. It's not even political, it's metaphysical. Western society is linear. You have a beginning, creation, you have an end, Armageddon, end times. That's why they believe future is progress. In the Hindu system, it goes in kalpas, it goes in cycles, which was something that was found in all pagan societies. This idea of a linear version of time is something that pre-monotheistic religions and cultures would have found very strange. In fact, it's the aberration, not the normality. And at heart, that is the reason why the problem with India, and that's why every issue is always exaggerated. There's no attempt really to find a solution. There's only attempt to attack. What's happening now is, bit by bit, it looks like India's getting kind of sick of it and saying, well, okay, say what you want. But ultimately, what will decide it is geopolitics. The West is dependent on oil and gas from Qatar, Saudi. That's why it has to go very carefully. It can't avoid to annoy those countries. It also was very dependent on manufacturing supply chains from China. Of course, with COVID, they have no choice but to rethink that. And that's why India will come up, because it'll become much more central to the Western economic system than it is at the moment. Just today, I got blocked by a left-leaning US journalist. I mean, I hardly ever comment on his page. He was really happy that Brazil was taking center stage in the BRICS group rather than India. I pointed out that President Da Silva has been close to Iran, which is, nuclear program threatens, which itself is unstable. The regime could be over at any point. We don't know what's going on in that country. Didn't like it, blocked. Because to say anything pro-India is regarded as being pro-India nationalist. That's ridiculous. End of the day, once India becomes much more central to geopolitics, there'll not only be a more appreciation of the ancient culture, but less this Hinduphobia, because it won't be in their interest to follow that lead.
All right. So yeah, I mean, that was one thing I wanted to touch upon is, how can we change this perception, or this? It's almost like a subconscious thing in the West, and even the left wing, which is supposed to be rooting for multiculturalism and which is against the kind of monotheistic fundamentalism, even that is not able to accept Hindu dharma.
Because the left came out of it. The left came out of it. Marxism came out of it. You see, people think,
even they think that this is a part of human civilization which has been left behind, and
right.
it's somehow backward and superstitious, and something
because
that
Marx
you should
wrote
go
it.
away with.
What the left does, it outsources its white guilt, its colonial guilt. So, for example, in Leicester, you had people of color being attacked, but are called fascists and white supremacists. That they change it as they want, and to understand it, you have to understand anti-Semitism. The Jews looked like other Germans, but they had a yellow star put on. The reason they had the yellow star put on them was because you couldn't tell them apart. Yeah, to find out if someone was Jewish, you looked in the synagogue register going back several generations and found out if they were there. That's how they decided. Yeah, but as Martin Bormann told Adolf Hitler, he admitted there's no such thing as a Jewish race. There's a Jewish spirit. And that's what you have to bear in mind. Yeah, very important. If all of India converted to Islamic Christianity because of the caste system, the issue wouldn't stop, because obviously caste discrimination would continue. At the moment, you have a situation where Christian and Islamic groups are saying, well, we should also benefit from reservations. Right? It's quite interesting. You converted because the Hinduism constructed imposes a caste on you, so you left that religion for equality. Well, if your religion teaches equality, you don't need caste reservation, do you? Oh, but we're still poor. Well, exactly. It's a social and economic issue. So if you abolished all the reservations based on caste and gave that affirmative action based on poverty, all communities in India would benefit. Hindus, Christians, Muslims, all of them. Oh, no, but it's a caste issue, it's a Hindu issue. And again, you go around in circles. And that's the problem, because it's the Hindu spirit. If you had mass conversion, you'll still have caste issues because there'll be no economic development. Yeah. And they'll say, oh, it's the Hindu spirit.
I think Pakistan is the best example of that. It's 98% Muslim. And
yes,
you still find it's a caste. Caste is still an important part of the society. And
exactly. And that's a very good point, because New York Times itself blamed discrimination in Pakistan on the Hindu caste system. Well, hang on a second. If it's 98% Muslim, you're still blaming Hindus for it? Again, the anti-Semitism link. You don't need Hindus there to blame them,
Absolutely. Because the kind of oppression that Pakistan sees, and it still has this feudal zamindari, jagirdari system, and they have bonded laborers, it's the Hindus
yes,
mostly
exactly.
who are.
So, exactly, in Indian Punjab, assuming land's not been sold off to pay for their university fees to get to Canada, somebody would be lucky enough to have land all around them, and they own the land. In Pakistan, they don't own the land, they own the people on the land. The Buddha family had land in hectares, all sides of the country. The people are stuck on it. They can't leave it. It's basically serfdom. How is that progress? And what is their excuse? Well, our religion teaches equality. Well, obviously, that isn't true, because only with Western intervention, that slavery by Islamic countries, notably modern Arabia, they stopped it. In fact, Saudi Arabia has slavery. I don't mean serfdom, I mean slavery until 1962. in the Emirates till 1963, in Oman, I believe, till 1970, in Mauritania till 1980, which only highlight the fact that it still existed there. And even now in Libya, you have people from Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, trying to get out of poverty, being sold in batches like slaves. But that somehow, that isn't true. You had ISIS selling slaves, girls as slaves on WhatsApp, using modern technology for it. But that's regarded as an aberration. But of course, Hindus do it. Now, since the issue came out about grooming gangs in the UK, people are saying, some Indian guy got caught talking to an underage girl. Look, high caste Hindus preying on white girls. I mean, really, are you that desperate? Where is such a network existing? That's complete fabrication. Just because one complete idiot is doing something like this and is a criminal, there's no network involved as there was with the other grooming gangs. But no, they want to create that sort of equality. They want to create that sort of equivalence. Sorry, equality is the wrong word to use. When they show the Ram Janabhoomi demonstrations and the activity for that, what do they show on Western TV? Hindu flag with swastika, because it gives them memories of the Harston Cruise, this twisted cross used by the Nazis. So when you see that ancient Hindu symbol, immediately Western mind thinks Nazis. It's not an accident, it's done deliberately. That's the problem with it. Again, that's why you have to dominate the narrative. Otherwise, if you don't speak, someone will speak for you and crush your voice.
All right. So, in conclusion, what would you suggest that Hindus should do and Bharat should do to kind of come out against this Hinduphobia and to demand that we be treated with equal respect?
Well, we have an example of it here. You used our Hindu Post. Great. That's an example to follow. There's too much reliance, at least in the US, Canada, and the UK, on government sorting the issue out. I'm not going to. Look, one thing I will say about those Christian mission organizations in India, Islamic groups around the world, they do grassroots work. Hindu groups tend not to do that. What they do, they import the Indian political mindset into those countries. Now, what I mean by that, when the British ruled India, they ruled it. You understand? So when independence came, while they took on board elections and democracy and political parties, they left a lot of things out. I'm not trying to dismiss India's developments. It made some very important strides. One of the main areas is the Green Revolution. People forget. They say under British, India was less corrupt. Maybe it was, but people had famines or were starving. Since independence, that has largely stopped. I mean, there have been issues with shortages and prices, but generally speaking, the mass famines that took place haven't happened since rice and wheat yields have increased. So, respect where it's due and progress where it's due must be recognized. But really, the thing is to start from the grassroots. You can't rely on the state. Yeah, in India, the top echelons, the color changed. So you've got a civil service whose job is to rule, not to serve the people. Same with MPs. When they're elected, they act like Maharajas, Nawabs. We're here to rule the people. Yeah, call it a vampire state. Call it kleptocracy. Yeah, if the British siphoned off wealth, so do these politicians who have Swiss bank accounts and their kids get educated abroad. Yeah, the idea they serve the people doesn't really exist. That has to change. Otherwise, nothing will. You'll have that same mentality in Hindu organizations in the UK. If you look, we're here to lead you. You do what we tell you. It's not a sense of service in the normal sense. Until that one factor changes, nothing will change. Yeah, but thankfully now there are moves to change that. There's a new generation coming up who, especially since the Leicester attacks took place, are asking, why do these established Hindu organizations keep quiet? They were very much sending commiserations for the death of the Queen. That's fine, happened at the same time, but were totally quiet on Leicester. And when people asked them questions, they got blocked, they got blanked, they got pilloried, they got abused. But that's not how you should behave as a community leader at all. You have no right to do that. You can do what you want, but don't expect everyone to just follow you. That's not how it works. But it has to change in India. You have to have one educational reform where you emphasize on the primary level, okay, not the elite institutions, just but the primary level. And the second thing is you change the political mindset. That's going to be very difficult. I don't expect it to happen overnight. But in Western countries, they should realize, look, we're here now. We're places where politicians, MPs serve the constituents serve the people. Yeah, they don't rule them. And the way they act in these countries is act like rulers. And that's one thing that any Hindu organization that comes up has really got to change. Because if it doesn't, it won't get anywhere.
That's right. The current Indian Republic, the state, it still retains a lot of that colonial mindset, the my baap attitude. It reflects in everything that we interact with bureaucracy or police. So you're absolutely right. That needs to change, and this new Hindu resurgence, new activism, and that is something which should continue. And it was a great discussion that we had, and we look forward to more such discussions.
Okay.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you, Vigamji. Thank you. Namaskar.
Namaste. Namaskar.